So let's talk about how to simplify the view on the street. If you're going to be traveling and sketching, you're probably going to be in foreign cities and you're going to run into problems of perspective. So let's talk about 3 solutions for how to make painless perspective. I first try to neutralize things. That's the easiest thing. Just avoid the whole situation of perspective and project your view to a flat-on, frontal, straight-on view. I'll show you how to do that. But also, sometimes you want to get that angle in, but there's ways to simplify it. We'll talk about how to do everything from basic shapes. Almost anything can be solved with cubes. And then finally, I'll show you just how to eyeball vanishing points. So with a few simple lines, you can get an approximation that you can fill in to tell the story. So there are easy ways. So let's show some demos. So on this guy, this is a kind of doorway, classical architecture. You run into these things all over Europe, and I love to draw these kind of details. And so sometimes the simplest thing is to just find the best viewpoint. Position yourself so you're looking at it straight on, and that takes away all the issues of perspective. But there are reasons, like you can't find a place to sit in a good view, or the street is too narrow, is very common. So sometimes you have to look at something at an angle, but you don't even really need to draw it that way. You can just mentally move your perspective. I'll show you how I will plot something out, even when I'm looking at it in an angle. So I'm just going to walk through it with an example, and then I'll draw it for you. But so the structure itself is symmetrical. Architecture always has a plan. So what you're looking for when you're building the thing is how does the object mirror. There are 2 pillars on the door, and on either side of this doorway there are these smaller secondary doors with arches on top. So see how the thing is actually kind of a mirrored symmetrical structure. So let me show you how I break that down. While you're looking at the object, remember I've been occasionally making these tiny little dots as I draw, little kind of markers. That's the way I'll start almost all of my little frameworks with the pen. You know, I used to do a lot of drawings in pencil before I went into the ink, so I ended up drawing it twice. And now I realize that I can visualize things just with these little markers. So when you're looking at a structure like this set of doors, there's 2 pillars that I want to get in first. And I'm just looking at things like how wide are they, where do they start, what's kind of the space in between them, and roughly what is the proportion of the object. So I make a little box, and this is like a little 2-dimensional square box that you can just visualize for yourself. I'm going to make these a little darker than I normally would, just so it's easier to see. So that structure is going to be what I hang everything on. So this pillar has a capital. And when I'm drawing these sorts of things, I'm looking at what's there, but I'm thinking about my approach of single line sketching. Always, how am I going to simplify the thing that's actually there into a spontaneous sort of fresh line, fun sort of sketch. So remember, always thinking that idea of single line sketching, getting the form in there that I can come back later and add my darks to, or paint in color. So by plotting the basis of this architecture first, everything's going to hang off that. Right or wrong, I've made my first estimate. And now I know that the thing has a center line, and there's kind of a little rooftop up top there, so I'll mark the next set of little positions. There are these interesting arches that go across the top of this thing. So by placing those little points first, I see how that structure sits on top. So even though I'm looking at the thing in angles, I know that it's symmetrical, and I can just plot this out and then fill my details in. I'm giving myself the structure to work inside. So inside here we have play of shadows. It'll cast shadows on all the little ridges that architecture is built out of, and the lintel over a door, or the door jamb. Okay, so actually I'm going to give myself a little adjustment to make this taller. So see how the single line just allows myself to stream some information into what's going on there. There's some carvings on this door, but it fits inside that framework I've given myself. In this case, one door is open. There's a little bit of, I'm looking for little cast shadows on architectural ornaments. And inside this arch, there's this medallion. So again, I'll look for a little plot of, this is the center of the thing, and it's about that tall. So then, when I have the circle in place, or the oval shape, there's a design in there. And you know, frankly, drawing this is a sort of impressionist, an opportunity for a little impression of what's there. I can't actually even see exactly what it is. It's just a design with some carving. Full of little cast shadows, little relief drawing. So by freeing myself up, allowing myself to make these kind of single line sketches, I'm not getting bogged down in the exact detail of what that carving is, just the fact that there are cast shadows there. We'll see how it begins to appear. This is the thing about all this drawing, is that very gradually it just begins to, the shapes begin to appear and life forms in front of you. And I'm thinking about where are the shadows going to fall and almost outlining them. So when I'm finally finished, that process of looking for landmarks and plotting where the shadows are going to fall is going to look a bit like this. And then there's the dark shadows put in with a brush pen. So that's how you can flatten something out, even though you might be having to look at it at an angle because there's no other viewpoint. Often you're looking at a big monument, so you're staring up at this tall object that's above you. So we have this archway in Lisbon, and there's this vanishing point perspective. It's not impossible to draw, but if you're not comfortable with it, you can do the same thing. Project it into flattened space and draw the object just two-dimensionally, as if your camera was maybe higher. You're suddenly 20 feet tall, and your point of view, just imagine, where's my point of view? Above my head, and I'm looking directly at the thing. So it's the same kind of process that will get you the finished drawing, which you can then paint in all the details. So I'll just show you again what I mean by that. So if I make my little marks that I want the drawing to fit on the page, so that's about as tall as it's going to go, and this is about where the ground is. If this is the center line, in this particular structure I have some sculpture on top, I have an archway, and I have some pillars. So then roughly about a third of the object is kind of the top, the upper structure, right? So see, I have a little invisible box plotted out. That's imagining the structure of the thing diagrammatically. And from there on, it's just a matter of finding smaller internal shapes, that there's always this kind of molding on architectural objects. Every edge is articulated with all these little carved opportunities for shadow casting. And the shape of that little capital up here. So we have some statues. That's kind of neat. So I'm subdividing that mental box of how big that thing is. And I see there's going to be two little guys here. And along my center line, this structure has an arch, right? So along my center line, I'm looking for some points to navigate. Like here is the center of the archway, and it curls down on either side, right? So now the shell of that structure is there. And as I begin to continue to find other measurements, I can look for, say for instance, where do these pillars start? How far down do they go? And just sketch in the shape of these Romanesque columns. I always love columns. They have this sort of almost flower-like thing that the top is full of these little shadow casting decorations, and then you have a space inside. So project my pillars straight down from there. Come back in with your brush pen and make those little cast shadows. So I like to, this process of projecting something and removing the perspective lets me spend time playing with the ornament on the object, which is the part that I like, and not really investing a lot of time into the architectural design, but playing with the surface details. So I like this kind of drawing. I have a lot of fun with it. So give that a try. So that's the process of simplifying it to a box, breaking it down, and really then it's just more and more observation and fitting those shapes together. So flattening something out. How do you simplify a complex shape down to its most basic elements? Almost everything can be built out of a stack of cubes. And a cube is the easiest kind of perspective to draw. So when I have something that's a little more complicated, this is a giant fountain in the park in Barcelona. There's this waterfall coming down, and it's encrusted with statues and carvings. And the stuff I want to draw, of course, is the statues and carvings. But to set the scene, I have to draw the structure as well. So this is a typical kind of problem. Let me just walk you through sort of a slideshow of how I might go at it. So set this up side by side here. The architecture of the thing, it's got this central cube kind of structure, and then there's another block leading off either side where there's an archway, and that comes down to these stairs. So when I look at it, I see all this ornament, but I try to think about my dot plot that I'm going to just draw right over top of this. Inside all of that carving, if I just ignore that, there's just a big box in here, right? And then that box can be broken down. I was looking for landmarks, right? Like, so where does the arch kind of end? That's sort of a landmark in that structure. And then there's another horizontal where the waterfall, well, the characters on the waterfall are going to sit. And then another horizontal structure where it hits the ground. So underneath everything is just that box. So what I'm doing while I work, there are my dots highlighted in red. Those are those little marks where I found those dividing lines, those nice horizontals that break up that cube. I'm trying to imagine it to see that structure without actually drawing it. When I sit down and draw, I'm just doing my single line drawing on top of it, but you just want to pre-visualize where's that cube go. So the little dots mark the structure in the corner, and then I hang everything on top of that. It's always there inside, in my mind, underneath the sketch. So it's how I can very quickly get to the conclusion without a lot of sort of pre-planning or measuring. So that's a little abstract. So here's a much more simple building. Actually, it probably looks pretty complex. There's a lot of ornament, there's a lot of windows, all the domes. I love a building like this because it has domes on it. I'll draw anything with that kind of fanciful decor. But really, the structure of this entire block is just a set of cubes. So it's actually pretty simple to draw this. So I'm going to think of this concept of the ground line and the roof line. And I'm going to think about, I'm looking on the corner of this building so I can very easily see that cube. That's a position I often try to put myself into, looking at the corner view of a structure. So it's just this box. If I mark these corners with my little dots, and you notice I'm kind of a little bit messy with these. They just become part of the final drawing. You won't even really see these little shapes. But I'm looking for the corners of the back wall and the angle of the roof. I'm going to just draw this right in. I probably wouldn't draw it so boldly in the finished drawing, but just to make it clear for you. So that entire street is just a cube seen in an angle. This is my house. This kind of box in the corner, and the rest of the street fades away with its own set of cubes. So I'm ignoring all of the carving and all the detail and sort of surface directions while I'm thinking about finding that box. And like I say, I'll just mark it by marking those dots. So that when I start, rather than drawing this line in, what I really will do when I start, actually let me just start again. I just wanted to pre-visualize that for you. So this is that trick. Place the dots, imagining in your mind the cube of this building, and it's just a box, and then do a single line drawing of how that roof line goes. This thing is covered in these little carvings. There's these little sawtooth kind of design on the edge here. And where it comes to meet the dome, there's a bunch of little plinths, little opportunities for these small decor objects. So I'm looking at each one of these as its own little shape. There are these little tower, minaret kind of things here. So see how I'm hanging my sketch right on top of that little box. And, going a little fast here for the purposes of a demo. You can take your time with this kind of edge. But once you have a roof line, that ends in one of these little minarets, and once you have a ground line, then you're just looking for opportunities to divide up that cube. That's the overall structure of the thing. So then there are verticals that drop down that make the subdivision of space. I go for the biggest shape first, and then what's the next biggest division is this wall to this wall. So in here, there's 3 pillars. So again, I encourage you to draw freely. Just really let your scribbles flow, because as you add your darks, and then when you come back with your watercolor, you're re-emphasizing all of these forms. And to get a little quick sketch like this in 10 minutes, 15 minutes, One thing I always say is the further you stand away from your subject, the better it looks. Kind of what I mean is when you get back home and you're 1,000 miles away, and you're not actually looking at the thing, what you have is your sketch. That's your personal representation, a real fresh impression. So the little details that you lose in these spontaneous sketches, you get back tenfold in the feeling of actually being there. The sense when people look at these sketches that they were done in such a spontaneous flow. It's really kind of a lovely thing to look at when you're going back over your books, and the memories come back to you. This is what you get. The sketch is as loose and spontaneous. You've determined where that major block is, and all that detail just fits in the space where it's supposed to go. And then when you get to the color, you can continue to divide those cubes up with colored shapes. You know, like I was talking about before. Think of even in your drawing, think of your big shapes of color that come later. So that's how that basic cube can be extrapolated to a bigger building. Let's try a more difficult one. So this guy, and I have a point about this second demo. So this is a fun building. It's covered in all this kind of interesting architectural detail. Neat little windows. It's the ornament that I love. But the structure, you can see the cubes in it. The towers are big blocks. The central building itself is its own structural cube. So to get a thing this complicated, it's really fantastically hard to draw. And you could make a perfect rendition of it, but it's really going to take you all day to figure that out. So my point with a thing like this is that the approximation that you make. So here, if I can just point back at the photo, see this kind of line that runs through it? It's a very clear first story, second story kind of subdivision. So that's when I talked about getting the roof line and the street line that I can project verticals from. How I dropped the sections of the building down from that roof line. Sometimes I'll do it through a middle line like these pillars or these moldings. So to me, the boxes of this thing, here's how I'm projecting it. So here's one of the boxes coming up. It's just a cube kind of shape. And I'm looking in my mind for the corners. That's all I've done for measuring. It's really the simplest possible thing because at the end of the day, what matters to me is getting the feeling of that thing. And I'm already into drawing it. In just a few minutes, a couple of lines and a couple of measures, I'm already into the part that I want to do, which is the sketching. Why delay? You're probably going to get interrupted. You're most likely going to run out of time. Your family's going to be like, here we go, I need gelato. So I want to get right into that sketching. Here's a neat little balcony here. And now's the part of discovery where I'm looking at this building and seeing what is out there. It has this funny little Art Deco almost kind of design on it. When I get to stop and really look and enjoy the building, this is the fun part for me. So that's the outside-in process that I'm doing to get this kind of drawing, right? The thinking about the box, building that shape, and then filling all those details in. And when I come back with the brushwork, all the little cast shadows make all those skinny lines kind of fit together, right? It really just should be a process of, here's the simple structure, and now I play on top of it. Last set of problems, typical situation, looking down a city street. And this is, I'm going to recommend I just want you to eyeball it. What do I mean? Like make an approximation. You are looking at a complex kind of vanishing point situation, and there's ways to calculate this, to plot it out and measure it. But you can probably make a pretty good approximation just using a single line sketch to think again of the roof line and the ground line. And everything projects in between down verticals. So we look at this alleyway that's shooting into space. Let me just show you sort of examples and then I'll draw one. So a very simple tunnel view is made by just making an approximation of the shape of the floor. If you just look at the ground in front of you as it recedes and the shape of the sky. So by drawing these two shapes, I have the sense of how that alley works. And that single line drawing just makes some interesting structure that tells me there's balconies and the archway and the lamp in there. So I have the whole thing in just 2 lines. So then the rest of it is just throwing the details on top. And now you can have fun with adding people, plants, foliage, little decorations on objects. And there's a neat little balcony in that scene I wanted to get in. So the detail just lays on top of that estimation. And it is not an accurate perspective, but I think you'll find it's good enough. It was fast, and it gives you the sense of being there. So let's work through one. So this scene is another big street view. It's a little bit wider. There's a lot of stuff going on in that scene. So when I'm looking at it, I'm thinking of that skyline and ground line. Those are the first two objects I need to get in there. So it's much like drawing a mountain range almost. So I think to myself, here's the gap of the sky that I can see through, and the buildings are like a cliff that runs towards it. So they just come in from the side, and there's just this weird kind of sawtooth line. I see some balconies as I'm coming down this thing. So I just add some texture to this line, and it hits the ground, and it comes back out towards me. So that's one side of my vanishing point. The other is a tighter kind of curve, comes right into the space there. And there's, okay, it's actually narrower. So I think I want to hit that distance. So let's bring that vertical line down, and it just has these notches in it that are balconies. I'm really just simplifying it into visual code for myself. And now I have that tunnel. And it's very rough approximation. It's not real in any way. But what it is a structure that I can lay things on top. So let me just start putting details into it. Okay, so you see how the sketch evolved. What I mean by hanging all the detail on top of that framework you gave. Remember how I started? Back in time, it was something like this. I just had that single line sketch for the roof and the ground. The shape of where the earth is, or the footprint of the buildings makes that tunnel that leads into space. So if you can eyeball that, then everywhere you've made a little step in there, you just drop those verticals and fill in the buildings. So at this point, it is not an incredibly accurate rendition, but it sure looks to me like the feeling of being on that street with the shops and the people and the bustle moving back and forth, and I'm ready for color. I have all my areas divided up, so if I were to paint it in my sketchbooks, I have my spots of color from the plants, the people moving through, and then very clear idea of which is the shadow side and which is the light side, and that shape, isn't this neat, this shape of the sky that comes through really makes that alleyway, that street perspective view. So I hope that's a great way for you to simplify things. For your homework, hit the streets of your town or go on a trip and take a look at architecture. Just get out and walk and find yourself some situations and look for ways you can use these three techniques: to neutralize by getting a frontal view, or to simplify by building things out of cubes, or start to have fun just eyeballing it. Get close enough, make a skyline and fill the details on top, and have fun with these sketches. So next up, in the next lesson, we're going to be sketching on watercolor. I'm going to talk about working with just interlocking silhouettes and building the whole scene out of shapes. So come back and we'll have fun with that.